what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, December 4th, 2018, and we've got lots and lots to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with the comments and questions. First, a brief explanation about what happened yesterday. Yesterday morning, I was starting to do my show prep, which I do for a few hours before I actually go on the air, and we lost our electricity here. And when the power came on back up, our internet service provider / cable TV provider wasn't working. And so I called over to them. This is where it gets really kind of weird. And I was informed that I was the first person calling about an outage in this area, which their equipment confirmed. They were not getting signals back and forth to the cable modems in this area. But then they told me they had this bizarre rule that they couldn't schedule, a truck to come on out until there were at least 3 complaints. So I literally had to go around my neighborhood trying to find people who were still at home. Because Claire and I, we work out of our home. This is not an industrial office area. And so finally I found 2 more people and I got them to call in. And then finally the internet service provider came on out and worked on the net and got everything back up and running eventually late in the day. Unfortunately, too late to do the show. But we're here today. Everything is working smoothly. And let's just get on into it. Okay. Obviously, the big news over the last weekend was the passing of George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st president of the United States. And boy, was there a media circus about that. Apparently, he passed away late Friday night. He was 94 years old. He had a good run. Can't say he died young. But the media trying to polish his historical legacy as hard as they can about, how he fought in World War II, which we did. Let's give him credit. He piloted a dive bomber in World War II. They glossed over some other things in his career, like being involved in the Bay of Pigs and being photographed in Dealey Plaza during JFK's assassination. The rest of it was just, this is a great man. We're saying goodbye to a great man. And just put everything on hold within the government while they go through this. And, of course, now he's having his lying in state at the Capitol and soon to have his funeral. Little bit of trivia. That little bier that his coffin was placed on in the Capitol Rotunda is the exact same one used for Abraham Lincoln. They never throw anything away over there. Alrighty, well, we actually have a caller on the line, so let's go to Jim in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. With all the stuff that's going on today, there's one story that hardly anyone is talking about, and I hope you're aware of it, about that Navy admiral that supposedly killed himself in the Middle East. Did you hear that story?
Oh, yeah. It's on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and it's one of those stories where they're saying it's an apparent suicide, but no details are being given. Today's version of the story, though, is making a point of that just 3 months ago that he was out there criticizing Iran. He was criticizing Iran. And so the obvious question right now is, are they going to claim Iran assassinated this man as part of this very obvious massive propaganda campaign being built up? Iran came in and they killed him with Novichok or some such nonsense as that. But to me, my gut sense is it probably was a hit of some kind. The question is, who's going to be scapegoated for it?
Well, not only that, though, if it was Iran or even the Israelis, how were they able to get that close to him?
I would just be guessing at this point, but my guess is they had somebody on the, able to get into his home, or maybe somebody he thought he knew and could trust.
Wow. And the other comment that I have, today was the hearing with the Senate and the CIA director, and after the hearing, apparently a lot of the Republicans are very angry with Trump because Trump still believes that the Saudi princess had nothing to do with the killing of the reporter.
Well, apparently Trump's position is that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was not physically present when it happened. And, of course, the issue that's coming out from the Senate and the rest of the world is, well, did he order the killing? I mean, if you remember when that Sergei Skripal situation happened, automatically everybody said, oh, Putin's behind it, Putin's behind it, Putin's behind it. So once again, we're seeing sort of an ad hoc handling of these stories. But I think Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has now officially become a serious embarrassment for the United States, and we're starting to see a lot more propaganda coming on out about him. Certainly the Senate thinks something ought to be done. Quite a few of the senators, including Rand Paul, are very angry. They were not allowed into this hearing. It's all very hush-hush and classified. So, but this is definitely putting the Senate and Donald Trump at odds with each other.
Right. Well, not only that, over the weekend, I'm pretty sure you saw the picture of Putin and the Saudi prince, giving each other a handshake and a high five, and they were
they were getting along just great over there at the G20.
Okay, Michael, that's it. You take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates.
All right, thanks.
Okay, some sort of a weird feedback on the phone lines there. Okay, let's talk about the war zones. There's a lot of them out there. We're going to collect the entire set, I think. A lot of attention is now being focused on Afghanistan. And we're starting to see a lot more articles coming on out saying, what are we doing there anyway? Over in the national interest, they're saying, what are U.S. soldiers dying for in Afghanistan? How much more blood must be spilled? How many more of our kids have to be blown up? What's going on over there? Now, we know that Afghanistan is about the oil and the opium, but that obviously is not something that the public would sit still for. And so they're scrambling about, how do we justify the continued presence over there? Even more alarming, over at the American Conservative, they have an article saying the U.S. is headed for a military defeat in Afghanistan. And they start out with this maxim that goes on inside the government: the U.S. can never be militarily defeated in any war. And the thinking is that the U.S. loses wars only because of a lack of political will, that we have too many cowards in governments, and I'm sure that a lot of people still think that the only reason we lost in Vietnam is we just kind of quit, which is more or less accurate, but that's how wars end. One side or the other quits. But according to this article, that maxim is going to get turned on its head, because the U.S. is losing militarily in Afghanistan. Back at the end of 2001, when the U.S. had gone on in and stomped Afghanistan by blaming them for 9/11, the Taliban were just reduced to a tiny portion of the country. And today they're back in control of the majority of the land. The U.S. right now is settling for simply keeping the puppet government in place, guarding the pipeline and making sure that the poppies are blooming. This article that came on out from Sputnik News is saying that the U.S. is actually getting ready to pull our regular military out and hire mercenaries to take over the Afghan war. Because one advantage of mercenaries is that you don't have to report on their deaths to the public. Over in Russia, specifically in the Azov Sea, Putin is saying it's too early to release the Ukrainian sailors and naval vessels seized in the Sea of Azov, and is accusing Kiev of provoking the incident to distract from their own domestic problems. I think Kiev was working hand in glove with other Western governments, including the United States. But basically, when he was talking to reporters at the G20, Putin covered a large array of topics, but basically said Moscow is refusing to release the 24 captured sailors. Now, remember, going into the G20, they said that the meeting that had been scheduled between Trump and Putin was called off. But it turns out they did get together for about 20 minutes about what was going on over there. And I have to disagree with Putin on this one. I think the smart thing to do would have been to just, send the Ukrainians and their ships home. Just skedaddle them, defuse the situation. But on the other hand, Putin may be facing a lot of pressure from his own government not to look soft or weak. Meanwhile, Putin was being very critical of Kiev and saying that as long as their pro-Western government is in power, the war against the eastern Ukraine will continue. The current government has no interest in resolving the conflict, especially by peaceful means. So that is going to go on. A lot of people around the world are saying, though, that Poroshenko is engaging in a very dangerous game of brinksmanship with Russia and the rest of the world. But at this point, the official propaganda of Russia stole the ships, Russia kidnapped the sailors, it's obvious this was a deliberate provocation. Now, Ukraine has access to the Azov Sea through the Kerch Strait, but it is Russian territorial waters, and Russia has some rules. 48 hours before you're going to transit the strait, you request for permission. And then 24 hours before you go, you reconfirm you will be doing this. It's all about traffic management, making sure you don't have too much traffic in the strait at the same time so things don't bang into each other. But these Ukrainian warships just basically dashed on in, refused to respond to Russian attempts at communication, were confronted by Russian warships, refused a legal order to stop, and that's a provocation. But again, I think it's wider than Poroshenko because according to this story out of Sputnik News, the United States and NATO are coordinating an alliance-wide response to the Kerch incident. And what I suspect is about to happen is a grab for Crimea. I think that's what this is really going to be all about. Okay, we have another caller on the line. Layla in Ontario. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It seems to be a very chaotic time around the world, but something rather dramatic has happened in England. For the very first time in history, the British Parliament has voted the British government to be in contempt.
Whoa.
Now, MPs have voted in contempt, but yes, this is bizarre, and it's all over Brexit. In fact, it's so severe that Nigel Farage, who's one of the ones who started up UKIP in 1992, has resigned because he objects to the fact that UKIP seems to have become obsessed with condemning Islam. And one of its leaders is Tommy Robinson, who will be speaking with the now leader of UKIP on Sunday. Now, Tommy Robinson's real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, Lennon, not Lenin. But Nigel Farage feels that UKIP has taken the dignity or the credibility of UKIP from being a parliamentary and political or arguing a political issue at the parliamentary level and taken it to becoming a street gang. And meanwhile, Tommy Robinson, people are trying to drum up support and sympathy for him. But meanwhile, this development of the British Parliament holding the government in contempt is astounding because the parliamentary tradition is basically what so many democracies have used as their pattern, as the format to found many democracies. And it's over the fact that the government refuses even to release the legal guidance that was given to the government with regard to Brexit.
Yeah.
I don't know what reaction you have to that, if you think it's just going to blow over or whether this signals something rather severe.
Well, as you know, they're coming up supposedly on this new vote, which looks like it's going to be defeated, which looks like Britain is heading for a no-deal Brexit. I think we're going to see a lot of chaos. This is definitely revealing a huge schism between Theresa May's government and Parliament, and I think it could actually bring her down.
It likely will, but I'm surprised that it wasn't a no-confidence vote against Theresa May individually, but instead to be holding the whole government in contempt of Parliament. That's astounding. I don't think I've ever heard of any such. Well, obviously, it's the first time it's ever occurred in Britain.
Yes.
So it certainly, I doubt that it's ever occurred in any other parliamentary democracy.
Well, that would be like the U.S. Congress voting the entire executive branch in contempt. I mean, that's how major this is.
Yes, and the fact that Nigel Farage is now condemning UKIP and condemning Tommy Robinson and the street activism, that too is going to have some sort of ramifications. What he was critical of was, he said UKIP was not founded to be an anti-religious party, to be criticizing, becoming itself an extremist group. Now, whether or not Islam is largely responsible for the destruction of some of the values in Britain is another matter. But to entangle the UKIP in it is what Farage seems to be opposed to. And this is the man who has spoken at about 1,500 meetings with regard to independence. Immigration, yes, was one of the issues, but I think he was talking about immigration in the sense of retaining the sovereignty of each nation and not as using it as an excuse to attack Islam. So this is the complications that have resulted from, and the sin really originates with the 1948 UN Declaration of Human Rights. That, if anyone looks at it, the 30 articles in there, I would guess probably a quarter to a third of the articles each contain some kind of language, when correctly interpreted, says that no nation can act in a way that undermines the UN Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. Thus, that is where the lack of national sovereignty was actually initiated. And it has become like common law. Common law is often not actually written in law. It's not a statute or one of the laws or in some kind of convention that governs a country. It just becomes common because it's there for so long.
Yes.
And that's how the UN Declaration was never actually signed onto. It was enacted by proclamation. Some did sign the original document, but many abstained. So it was enacted as a proclamation. And that's what's going to happen on the 70th anniversary in Marrakesh. It's likely that the Global Compact on Migration is probably going to be made the law of the planet by proclamation. Doesn't matter if the U.S. signs on.
That's what the UN is trying to do right now with this, migrants have a right to go wherever they want, but there's a huge pushback building against it.
And that's what's going to cause probably civil wars. And whether that was the
I'm afraid you're right about that.
It's hard to say.
Yeah. Nobody wants to back off on any of this. Anyway, listen, Layla, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the news update. That definitely is an historic incident, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Well, that certainly is an interesting development, and it's popping up all over the news media. Nothing on the Fox feed. They're still going on and on about George Herbert Walker Bush. But Layla is right. This is history. This would be, like I said, this would be like Congress voting the entire executive branch in contempt. And I think Theresa May is going to be gone. I don't think she's going to get the votes to support her plan. That means a no-deal Brexit. Theresa May is probably gone. In fact, the entire British government could collapse from this. And we're seeing all around the world, all of these places where there's this fight going on between nationalists and globalists, and it's tearing these nations apart. We're going to be talking in a little while about what's been going on over in France, because if you think that's all about a gas tax, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. So anyway, the Kremlin has unveiled what would have been the agenda of the canceled Putin-Trump meeting, and it would have been about the United States' possible withdrawal from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And again, for the war hawks in our country, the military-industrial complex, they would not have wanted Putin and Trump to come to some kind of a deal, because they want to start building more missiles. They want war. War is good. Lots of money. So what if there's several billion people dead? It's too many humans anyway on this planet. And that may be one of the reasons why that Kerch incident was set up. And it wouldn't be the first time the intelligence agencies or the military sabotaged high-level talks aimed at slowing down the rush toward war here. So U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is out there. He gave a speech at the NATO summit in Brussels saying that Russia has 60 days to prove full and verifiable compliance with the intermediate range nuclear forces, or the U.S. will quit that treaty. Russia has come back responding, saying that Russia is actually in full compliance with the INF treaty, and the United States knows it very well. So, again, this is an updated version of Saddam has nuclear weapons. Apparently, things are really getting tense over in Ukraine. The Ukrainian police have raided 3 Orthodox churches aligned to Russia amid the mounting political and religious tensions between the two countries. Now, all of the mounting is coming, of course, from the Ukrainian side. And Archbishop Clement Vecheria, a spokesman for the Russian-aligned Ukrainian Church, compared the raids to the crackdown on religious freedoms during the early period of the Soviet Union. Bad things are on the horizon. Apparently down in Georgia, Russia, Georgia, not our Georgia, 25,000 Georgians held a protest against the election of a ruling party-backed candidate to the presidency, claiming the election was stolen, and are demanding snap elections. And that, of course, is riling things up in what is a Western-backed nation. So now we have the people of Georgia are not happy with the links to the United States. Okay, now, getting on down to Syria, Russia is expanding its air defense network in Syria. This, of course, has caused the U.S. and Israel to stamp their feet and say, no, 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 you can't do that. But Russia has reportedly completed an advanced inter-access area denial network in Syria, which of course poses a challenge to the U.S. military presence in the country and the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Moscow has deployed S-300 and S-400 missile systems, and it's also stationed at least one advanced 1L-122-1E targeting radar and Barnall-T mobile command and control system for short-range air defense systems in the war-torn state. Apparently, the Syrian army has eliminated 270 ISIS members in Al-Sawaida province, and seized a large amount of weapons and ammunition, including 12-tow anti-tank guided missiles. Guess where they got those from? So things are still going on in Syria. It's dragging on. It's turning into another quagmire. It's going to be another Afghanistan. We're still going to be there 17 years on. And everybody's going to be saying, why? What are we doing there? What are we accomplishing? We can't tell you. It's stuff you're not supposed to know, like oil and opium. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the conflict zones all over the world, and it just feels like everything's getting so fragile. Apparently, the head of MI6 in Great Britain is warning Russia, don't underestimate us. Don't you dare underestimate us. This is coming from the chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, Alex Younger, and is still pounding on that Salisbury poisoning case and pushing that stance of perpetual confrontation with the West. Yay, yeehaw, we got the Cold War back. More money for us, less money for you. More money for us here. Sober minds at Russia Insider are saying the world really cannot afford a war between the West and Russia, because even Russian experts, who've got a lot of respect for the tremendous military capacity of the United States, still point out Russia will have a second strike retaliation capacity. And that's going to be bad for everybody. The U.S. is going to get destroyed. That's a bad thing for us. Russia will get destroyed. Bad thing for them. And there'll be radiation all over the place. That's bad for everybody. We're all still dealing with the lingering radiation from all those open air and Pacific tests back in the 1950s. If you have the appropriate lab equipment, you could just take in a sample of air and yep, there it is. My own souvenir of the Baker test from Operation Crossroads right here. I've got it framed on the wall. Meanwhile, the aircraft carrier USS John C. Stennis and its support group are heading into the Persian Gulf for a show of force following this Iran ballistic missile test. And again, everybody tests their missiles. You know, what is the big deal here? You know, it's good when we do it. Not all of our tests work on out. That's why you test. Look at how many tests North Korea did that rekitted themselves right off the launch rails. That's why you have a test, so that you know these things work. But the U.S. is trying to turn this into another way of demonizing Iran. And so they're going to send the Stennis in there and just do this show of force here. Now, Iran's defense minister is out there saying that despite the sanctions imposed over the last 40 years, that Iran does have a significant, and he emphasizes, defensive missile capability. And that basically the only message Iran is trying to send to other nations is, let us keep the peace. Let's not get into something that's going to make everybody feel really, really bad. Now, Fars News is out there saying that the United States has launched a massive propaganda war against Iran. And of course, that's the build-up to the war. We've got to demonize Iran. We've got to make everybody hate them and fear them and, you know, just want them all to die. We saw that with Afghanistan. We saw that with Iraq. We're seeing it with Syria, Libya, Tehran. And this story that came on out in Almasta News might be fake news, and there's a lot of that around. Supposedly, Iran has deployed a massive naval contingent to the Persian Gulf after the nation's President Rouhani threatened to block the vital Strait of Hormuz. Now, I haven't found a confirmation for that. And again, it's not Iran's nature to be the aggressor. Not in 200 years. but we can expect to see more of this. Oh, Iran's doing bad things. Iran's testing their missiles. How dare they do that? What a provocative thing to test your missiles. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, Errol. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call, Mike. I came to a conclusion. I think that every empire needs to fall and another will rise.
Yes.
So in the sense of, it's in the nature of mankind, obviously. But the problem that we have now is the danger of nuclear weapons. So we can elaborate on that. But what I find interesting is we see nations come together. But we see now that empires in the past, like the empire of Greece, Italy, how do you call it? The European Empire, the English Empire, the Dutch Empire, even the Dutch Empire. You know, everything is coming down to a point, and we now see that I call it full circle. It's a full circle, but everybody got very dangerous weapons.
Yes.
And we don't know what to do with it. So I came to a conclusion that it's obviously that empire building, so it's not, I can say like this, it's not even empire building, it's like progressing. It's like Mother Nature progresses in the mind of the intelligence.
Well, history has shown us that all nations.
NASA, you know, NASA.
Errol?
You work for NASA, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. History has shown us that all nations, and of course, an empire is just a big nation. They have a life cycle. They'll start out. They'll be energetic. Yeah. They'll be productive. They'll be building. Then they get into an era of complacency, and they start letting things kind of decay, and people just sort of start to become dependent on the state, and it leads to basically collapse. And along the way, trying to save themselves, governments will very often start wars of conquest to expand their territory and obtain the wealth of other nations to keep theirs going. But no nation lasts forever. And I'm seeing signs of imminent collapse in a lot of nations around the world right now, including the United States. This whole push for globalism could crash the entire global system and literally lead us into a new dark age.
Exactly, and that's what I wanted to say to you. We have been in the old school. I call it old school. In the past, you know, when we have sticks and stones. Nowadays, we got so much advanced technology and everything. I think there are some people that maybe on the age of 60, 70, 80 years old, that think always, and also do not forget what literature they are reading in their schools. So they are programmed to think that this is the way, and we need to go that way and not another way. So the concept, what I'm trying to say to you is, like what NASA does and everything, we need to get out of here. Anyways.
Hey, the first starship shows up. I'm going to book passage for Claire and I. We're kind of stuck here. And the problem with a world war is it does involve the entire world. And, you know, they're already talking about, you know, Australia's going to come on in and help confront China. Everybody's lining up and choosing sides. But you're absolutely correct. We need to appreciate the scale of the weaponry being used. And I'm not just talking about the nuclear bombs. Even the conventional weapons are much more powerful per, you know, pound of weight than what was being used in World War II. And in addition to the proliferation of the weapons and the possible involvement of nukes, which I think is going to be inevitable. Once there's a clash of arms, use of nukes will be inevitable. but there is that other factor that we have all of these automated systems, and the software isn't always perfect, which is what we saw with the USS Vincennes and that Iranian passenger jet or TWA 800. These systems make mistakes, and they can do bad things before humans can react.
That's true, and it's like the same in the movie War Games. You told it before. It's exactly the same. If there is one error, but nowadays I want to say to you, and this is very interesting. I see now in my analysis what I do with geopolitics and everything. I do this now for 15 years, and I see now that people are coming together. So the world is going to unite. It's not about a new world order or whatever they think they are saying, or whatever for fear mongering or whatever. It's about we need to understand each other. We have the capacity with internet. We have the capacity to understand each other.
Errol,
the capacity.
Errol?
Yeah.
Okay. We, ordinary people of the world, can get along just fine. But unfortunately, through some defect, we keep giving our obedience to some very crazy people who will stand up there and say, let's have a war. It's going to be glorious, and the gods will love us, and you'll go to Valhalla and so forth. Anyway, Errol, I got a bunch of calls.
They are still there.
Errol, I'm sorry.
They are still there, but they're still there, but they are diminishing. Thank you for my call.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Errol, where the hell you been? I mean, Errol, you got to call in more often again. You used to. I mean, we need to know what's going on in the Netherlands, Mike. I mean, we need to know what's going on, what they think of Russia. We need the people who used to call from the UK call back in to what's going on over there. Hey, Mike, what's Macron's favorite color? It's not yellow.
Not anymore. Not anymore. Did you see when he actually got to the airport for the G20 and the airline ground crew were standing around wearing those reflective yellow vests? That had to be
I saw that.
Yeah, chilling moment for him.
Yeah, that's like, what, they follow me? You know, hey, did you see there's a new video out where they're actually protesters just tipping over cars on the side of the street?
Yeah.
That place is messed up, man. That's our future, Mike, because that's what austerity looks like. This is all about austerity, people. What happened in Greece? You know, the bank runs, the higher fuel prices, France is in a bad state now. You know,
it is.
And
it
so
is.
You know,
Macron may have to resign.
But the scary thing is, Mike, that these people will start wars. And remember, Syria was a colony of France, right? So I mean, France was involved in that attack on Syria with Israel. Remember?
Yes.
They had the French frigates out there, and one of the ships, I think, had a defect because it couldn't shoot its missiles off.
Yeah, I remember.
But I mean, this is all about austerity in France. Yeah, I mean,
I
the
think there are
Western
other
world
causes.
isn't really.
Dustin, I think there are multiple causes, and as I said before, you can have a population that is, becoming resentful. They're feeling the pressure. There's the fuel tax thing, but there are other underlying issues. And once the faucet is turned on, turning it off becomes very, very difficult. And I think the anger and resentment over other things like the open borders. They've turned Paris into an absolute mess with all the refugees. Right now, it's overrun with rats because of all the trash and everything that's being left in the streets.
And it smells over there, too, Mike. They said it smells. The streets smell.
Yes.
Like San Francisco smell. Come on, man. Why? They don't care, though, because they live in their own world. They're guarded gates communities,
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it amazing, Mike? They can put fuel prices on to the rural community gets hurt the most. The people who live in the city don't really get hurt as much. You know what I mean? Because they don't have to drive that far to work. It's a different world.
Well, it's definitely, yeah, you're right. People in the rural communities, especially farmers, farm equipment takes oil and gas. Anyway, listen, Dustin, we're going to let you go, and I'm going to take one more call before the commercial break. Bob in the Upper Peninsula, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael. Hello.
You're on the air.
Oh, okay. I see that the commercial is back on TV where they say that we didn't wait to storm the beaches of Normandy. Well, yeah, actually, we did by almost 2 years. The Russians turned back the Wehrmacht of Germany right after the beginning of 1943. And if we didn't attack from the west, Stalin would have came in and picked up the entire continent.
Yep.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, people don't understand that. We didn't go in and save anybody's bacon. We were there just because if we didn't attack from the west, we would have been left without anything to deal with at all.
Well, I think the causes and origins of the war are a little bit more complicated than that, and you might want to look at this article I wrote some years ago called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, because what World War II was really ultimately all about and was engineered was because Germany had broken free from their private central bank and started a new economy on a value-based currency, and it lit Germany up like a Christmas tree. It was even called the German Miracle. Adolf Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year for this amazing economic transformation, and that, of course, was a threat to all the private banking families on Earth, because people were going to look at what was going on in Germany and say, why aren't we doing that here?
Understood, Michael. I'm just saying that it was the Russian army that did the heavy lifting in World War II.
Yeah, the Russian army broke the back of the Nazi, the Wehrmacht. Yeah, if it hadn't been for that, D-Day would have failed. Anyway, listen, Bob, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I'm going to ask you all for a favor. Okay, we're going to leave the phone lines open, but don't call unless you have something important to share, like Layla did. Obviously, that was a call that was very much welcome. But we don't need any more walks down memory lane, and we don't need chit-chat. Not today. I got way too much stuff to go through. So just please bear with us, and we'll share the airtime here. So getting on back to this whole situation over the murder of Khashoggi, and apparently the Trump administration's decision to not blame Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was simply based on the fact that he wasn't actually there. He wasn't physically in Istanbul during the murdering, and that seems to be the sum total of what the administration is resting on. Meanwhile, of course, the CIA had intercepted 11 messages from the prince to one of his top advisors who was there in the hours immediately leading up to and following the murder. So apparently at least one of the intercepts they got and decoded talked about the plot itself, with the crown prince saying, quote, "We could probably lure Khashoggi outside Saudi Arabia and make arrangements even if they couldn't lure him back to Saudi Arabia." So, yeah, that's pretty serious. Now, as I mentioned before, the CIA director finally got to speak to senators in a closed-door session. Rand Paul is very upset because he was one of the senators who were told they could not go on in. And he's now saying that's the very definition of the deep state, when Congress, which is supposed to have oversight responsibility for the other two parts of our government, are not allowed to do their job. But at this point, it looks like there's going to be a deep row in the Senate over Saudi Arabia. Going to be a little bit of a brawl. How will they respond to Saudi Arabia's role in the slaying of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi? And it's going to be an interesting situation to see, because after all the fury directed toward Russia over the Skripal case with zero evidence, they can't really back off Crown Prince bin Salman when the CIA's got the intercepts where he's actually talking with his assistant about how they're going to get this guy. So, anyway, Keith Preston, who's director of AttackTheSystem.org, is saying that Washington, D.C. is feeling very much embarrassed by Mohammed bin Salman's actions, but right now can't do anything about it. And it gets back to that impasse. The Saudi Arabian government is a staunch ally of the United States, not to mention Israel. It is obvious the Trump administration wants to maintain that relationship. Now, remember when Donald Trump came on out and talked about how he was just going to let this slide, he basically said, we don't want to anger Saudi Arabia. They'll stop buying stuff from us and they'll start buying stuff from Russia and China. Anyway, we have to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. Turning toward Yemen now, that is also appearing to be about to become a serious contention within the halls of Congress. And despite the Trump's administration claiming it would seek a ceasefire in Yemen, the U.S. actually sabotaged a United Nations attempt at such a ceasefire. But opposition to the war is growing in Congress, and that's reflecting the fact that the American people are really starting to get on those phones and fax machines and say, look, this has gone on long enough. So this article over here in the original antiwar.com saying, yeah, there's popular discontent with the Yemen war. I mean, there's discontent with all of the wars, but this one, there's no way to gild this, to make it look good. This is just Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and the United States pounding on the people of Yemen for wanting to run their own country. And everybody knows it. And I think in general, the American people have become very war weary. We've been at war, all these places, 17 years now, straight. Longer than we were in World War I and World War II put together. Apparently, new deadly fighting has erupted once again in Hodeidah. And apparently, the fighting erupted in the east and south of the Red Sea city. And apparently, Houthis on their television channel referred to an exchange of tank fire. So the heavy artillery is now coming on in. The United Nations is still out there saying that Yemen is on the brink of a major catastrophe, which it really is, followed up by a request for money. The United Nations is appealing for $21.9 billion to address 21 humanitarian crises worldwide next year, including $4 billion for Yemen, which is currently their largest aid operation. Now, over in Israel, there have been hints about a big military operation, and it's being referred to as the Northern Op. And so apparently, according to Haaretz's senior military correspondent, Amos Harrell, he said this could signal that Israel is going to attack Lebanon, mostly to attack Hezbollah, get the Litani River, and may actually try and provoke a conflict with Iran. So, meanwhile, in Jerusalem, tensions are at a boiling point. Israel is rapidly trying to cement their grip over the whole city, and it set off increasingly visible confrontations between the Israelis and the Palestinians in the city's eastern sector, which according to the United Nations is supposed to be the Arab Quarter. And basically Trump's decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem has emboldened Israel to simply grab. And of course, to the Palestinians, that eastern part of the city, they see as the capital of their future state. They're willing to share Jerusalem. Israel is not. Now, interestingly enough, there's an article over in strategicculture.org saying that the pushback against Israel is beginning. And the article basically goes through the complete iron-fisted control Israel has had over our politics for decades and decades, and how any member of Congress who tried to stand up to them, like Cynthia McKinney, would be destroyed. But in this last election, there were 3 Democratic Congresswomen, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who have indicated they don't feel like discussing Israel in total worshipfulness, that they think it is time to take an honest look at what Israel's government has been doing. Now, a lot of this is being driven by politics because polls are showing among Democrats who've usually been staunchly pro-Israel, Democrats favored Israel over Palestine by a margin of only 2%. That is a major, major political defeat for Israel. It's certainly a victory for BDS. And for those who are saying the Palestinians have just as much right to be here as anybody else. And another area in which we may see the pushback happening, there was this major propaganda effort sponsored by the French and Israeli governments. Huge amount of money. Was called Saison France Israel, or France-Israel season, was a series of hundreds of cultural events backed by both governments, and it ran for 6 months until the end of last month. And Israeli officials are acknowledging it was a complete failure. People just didn't want to show up. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Benjamin Netanyahu's legal woes are growing. Police are seeking new bribery charges related to Bezeg Telecom Israel, where basically Netanyahu awarded regulatory favors to them in return for positive coverage of him and his wife on a news website, Walla, owned by the company. So Israeli police are saying they've got enough evidence for bribery and fraud charges to be brought against Netanyahu. This might actually punch Netanyahu's button. He may start a war just as a distraction. I still remember back when Monica Lewinsky was testifying before Congress about the blue dress. And she came walking on out of the building expecting a phalanx of corporate media that she would speak to. The steps were empty because while she'd been inside, Bill Clinton launched cruise missile strikes into Syria and one other Middle Eastern country to supposedly destroy a biological weapons laboratory, which actually turned out to be an ordinary aspirin factory. So you, the American taxpayer, got to pay for the $1 million a shot cruise missiles, and you got to pay for rebuilding the aspirin factory as well. All right, so let's talk about what's going on in France, because it is very, very significant. And apparently the French have just taken on the name the Yellow Jackets because they're wearing those reflective yellow safety jackets that you basically buy at any hardware store. And they're in the streets in the hundreds of thousands in what is being described as a citizens' revolution. And there's more going on here than Macron's threat to put a massive tax on gas. As one of our callers mentioned, French students are blocking high schools. They're burning cars. throwing stones at police and amid these protests here. And apparently police are putting up barricades. Now, there's an interesting little take about this. This is over at shtfplan.com. The Paris tax revolts. The world begins to realize the truth about government. That's one aspect of it. I think the world is also beginning to realize the truth about globalism. But this article is saying that people are waking up to the disaster that governments have caused and funded by theft over the course of human history. Now, the French revolts, which began over the increase in the petrol tax, have left 133 people injured, over 400 arrested. And the protesters are out there saying all taxation is theft. So it's spread beyond the petrol tax, the gas tax. And this could easily spread. We already know other parts of Europe are starting to have yellow jacket protests. They've been abused too much. They've been taxed too much. They're fed up. And more to the point, people are realizing that all this money that's taken away from them is not making their lives better. It's being spent to basically commit these horrific crimes in places like Yemen and Syria and Libya. And they're not happy about that, and they don't want to be stolen from any longer. And by the way, this is not just the protesters and the government. There are factions breaking up within the government itself. Apparently, paramedics are on one side, riot police are on another. And apparently, ambulance drivers were pictured facing off with officers during a demonstration in the Place de la Concorde. Right now, 80% of the people in France, ordinary working people, not the professional bureaucrat class, support the yellow vests. 80%. Now, the corporate media is out there trying to focus on the violence of the protests. Ooh, bad protesters, bad protesters. And as usual, are trying to basically downplay what's driving it. You know, the political and economic complaints central to the demonstrations. People don't just get up and start rioting without a really, really good reason. They know they could get hurt. They know they could get arrested. They know they could get killed. Now, French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe has announced there will be a 6-month suspension of the fuel tax hike, which triggered the unrest across the country, saying this is aimed at stopping the violence and restoring public order. It may be too late for that because the Yellow Vest protesters are expanding their demands. And once they're on the move, getting them to stop would take a Gandhi to stop them, I think, right now here. So hundreds of thousands of French people have joined the protests since November 17th, and most of them peaceful, but unfortunately there is a large and growing part that are becoming violent. Over 70% of French people polled said they support the movement, although an even higher percentage said they disapproved of the violence, which is mostly centered in Paris itself. Over at Russian Insider, they're saying that Macron might have to resign. And you know what's really ironic about this? This is a gas tax, which Macron imposed to combat human-caused global warming in the city of Paris, home of the Paris Climate Accord. A little bit of an irony there here. Another spin, and this is the one I think is what's going on because we're hearing of these yellow vests in other countries right now. Over at newsfromtheperimeter.com, that this could be the start of the Great Awakening. This could be the start of the revolt against globalism. And I remember years ago when all of this Soros nonsense started to come on out and we began to see the backlash and the problems that was being created. And I speculated that this push to create a global government could spark a global revolt. And it looks like other people are starting to think exactly the same thing. By the way, look at the corporate media coverage of the French riots and protesters and how negative it is about, oh, those, we have to have the rule of law out there. Those French protesters, they're violent, they're bad. Then think back about the corporate media coverage during the Maidan in Kiev, when the corporate media was out there saying, yes, Ukrainian people, you kick out that government that doesn't want to join the EU. So, over in China, the military are on heightened alert after U.S. Navy warships sailed through the Taiwan Strait. This is the third such operation this year. I think it was a rather dumb thing to do, given that Donald Trump was trying to basically repair trade with China at the G20. Or maybe whoever gave that order to sail those ships through the Taiwan Strait wanted to sabotage that meeting. It's getting hard to know who's really calling the shots in this country. I think there are too many people who think they are in control here. We have been talking about America's weapons, which can be formidable, but not always. And apparently, there are these U.S. shipyards that are supposed to be doing attack submarine repairs. And they don't have enough people working. They don't have enough room. And to give you one example of what that's resulting in, the USS Boise, which is a Los Angeles-class attack submarine, was slated to enter a shipyard for an extensive period of repairs, fixes, and modifications back in 2013. Because of the backlog on fixing all this stuff, they hadn't gotten attention by 2016. At which point officials determined the USS Boise was unfit for operations. So the U.S. Navy basically sank $1.5 billion into an attack sub that doesn't move. I'm sure they'll sell it to a museum somewhere here. Meanwhile, over in Russia, they've started sea trials for the latest in their class of Bore ballistic missile submarines. And they're going to order 2 more. And this will bring Russia's total ballistic missile submarine fleet to 11 boats. Now, the Bore is much smaller than the old Typhoon class, but apparently carries the same weapons load. So that will be interesting here. Over in Great Britain, apparently there's been a bit of a shakeup in the military command in an argument over the F-35 and which particular variant Great Britain should be importing. And apparently this argument is between the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. And obviously the Navy wants the Navy version, the Air Force wants the Air Force version. Apparently the nature of the deal precludes them buying half and half. But apparently Air Marshal Michael Wigston will now lead the Royal Air Force, while Vice Admiral Tony Ratigan would become Britain's first Sea Lord and Chief of Naval Staff. Now here's where we're going to find out who's really running the country. Russia Insider basically quoted a Donald Trump tweet that he wants to end the crazy, Trump's words, arms race with Russia. He wants reconciliation and an end to the new global arms race. That's something he actually campaigned on. So, having seen Trump flip-flopping before, this is the operant question. Is he going to come back in another week and say, yes, we've got to arm up against evil, evil Russia? Because he certainly stepped on a lot of toes with this one. Everybody in the military-industrial complex is out there saying, no, we can't have this. Peace means no money. Anyway, one of the issues Trump may be looking at is the fact that Russia has developed some new weapons that are decades ahead of the United States. Because our military-industrial complex is all about making money. getting as much money as you can, spending it as quickly as you can, and keep rebuilding the weapons that won World War II. And Russia and China, they're thinking about World War III as well as they should be. Okay, here's a little bit of propaganda, possibly leading to a false flag. Supposedly there's this ISIS supporting media group that is threatening New York City for an attack on New Year's with snipers, package bombs, silencers, and they're out there distributing all of these posters. And again, one of the problems about this time of the year, we have two major holidays coming up, Christmas and New Year's, either of which would make a great symbolic target for a false flag event to really crank up the war and get it going. I can imagine there's a lot of brass walking around the Pentagon right now saying, let's just get this thing going. I'm tired of waiting already. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to turn to our domestic politics, and it's turning into a three-ring circus. All we're missing are the clowns. Well, what am I saying? We've got a whole Congress full of clowns here. But former FBI Director James Comey has dropped his attempt to get a judge to quash the congressional subpoena and says that he has reached a deal with the GOP lawmakers regarding his upcoming testimony. And so Comey is going to testify before them. And the Republicans have agreed he gets to talk when he's done, and there'll be a transcript released in 24 hours. This is the closest he can get to public testimony, meaning Comey's going to go in there and grandstand. He's going to try and make it look like turning a blind eye to the Clinton Foundation, to the email server, to everything else, was the only rational decision he could make. And no, it wasn't. Because as Trey Gowdy keeps trying to remind James Comey, Title 18 does not require intent. She didn't mean to do wrong, does not get her off the hook. Now, Judicial Watch has filed a lawsuit to obtain the records of meetings with that Clinton DNC law firm that paid for the anti-Trump dossier. So that will be interesting. Meanwhile, author Stephen Cohen is saying that those who are promoting that Russian hoax, they're going to trigger World War III, even nuclear war. And that's a very real possibility. The United States ended World War II with nuclear weapons. They could just go ahead and start World War III with nuclear weapons. Paul Craig Roberts, I think about 2 months ago, was saying he was hearing serious talk on the inside about, forget about ground invasions or anything. Let's just haul off and hit them and settle things once and for all. Article coming on out of Sputnik News talking about the expected hearing. United States Attorney John Huber, who was appointed by former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, is due to testify about his probe into the Clinton Foundation. Now, it was supposed to happen tomorrow, but because of the funeral for George Herbert Walker Bush, it has now been delayed. But apparently, 2 whistleblowers have signaled their willingness to shed light on the charity's alleged wrongdoing. And as you may be aware, one of those whistleblowers' homes got raided by the FBI. Now, this guy is a recognized, acknowledged whistleblower who's protected by law under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. And so Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley is demanding answers from FBI Director Christopher Wray about just why this guy's home was raided. Now, the whistleblower, Dennis Kane, was once employed by an FBI contractor, turned over his documents to the Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz regarding the Bureau's failure to investigate potential criminal activity regarding Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, and the Uranium One deal. So the investigators already have the information. And what that tells me is the FBI was looking for something that they could use to blackmail this Dennis Kane or threaten him, to get him to change his story, to get him to not show up, which means Christopher Wray is just as crooked as Comey was. Speaking of the Clintons, it is not going very well for them. As you know, they're out on their little book tour, talking tour, an evening with the Clintons, and it's basically empty spaces. In fact, up at Toronto, in the Scotiabank Arena, by the time the event actually started, those $177 tickets were being sold for single digits. In fact, the parking cost more than getting in to see the Clintons. And that has to be a bit of a shock for Hillary. Because remember, 4 years ago, people were willing to pay any amount of money to see the woman who was going to be heading into history. So hopefully this will lead to her decision not to try and run again in 2020. I think it's time to get some new blood in there. I'm glad Tulsi Gabbard is throwing her hat in the ring. Now, you've probably already heard this, but I'm going to mention it again anyway. Jerome Corsi, who's a conservative writer, has filed a criminal complaint against Robert Mueller. And Corsi is alleging that Mueller is on a rampant bullying bid in an attempt to get Corsi to bear false testimony against President Donald Trump. And he's going to take the matter to court. And Fox News was just running a lower third saying that there are now signs the Mueller investigation may be closing soon. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, turning on over to London, specifically the Ecuadorian embassy, questions are still very much up in the air. What's going to happen to Julian Assange? But there's been a bit of an embarrassment over the attempt to use Assange to create the image of a link between the Trump campaign and Russia. Now, as you know, WikiLeaks leaked out all those DNC emails, which the Hillary campaign claimed were hacked by Russia, but which the metadata proves were done as an inside leak, most likely by Seth Rich. And The Guardian recently came on out with this story that claimed Paul Manafort had visited Julian Assange in 2013, 2015, and the spring of 2016. And everybody pretty much said, no, didn't happen. Well, we're The Guardian, you will believe us here. And, of course, it's blown up in their face because of Paul Manafort's passport stamps. Don't show him being in Britain during that time. And a former consul and first secretary at the Ecuadorian embassy in London has basically said it did not happen. He's not in the logs. He didn't get on in. The Guardian just made it up. And what's complicating this for The Guardian is that one of the people who wrote this story was involved in another smear job against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. They wrote a story claiming that WikiLeaks was itself a hacker organization, breaking into various places, breaking into government offices. Well, WikiLeaks has never been a hacking organization. They are a whistleblower clearinghouse, if you will. But it's just more media lies here. If you're wondering why things in this country are getting so bad, it's because the government is so busy fighting itself. It doesn't have any time left over to do things like, fix the roads or repair the bridges or keep the dams from collapsing. And as soon as the Democrats get control of the House of Representatives in January, they're just going to be spending all their time on probe after probe after probe of Trump and Russia and Trump, and by golly, we're going to get you. And they're going to bring back this Russian interference in the 2016 election issue. This isn't a government, it's a kindergarten. Now, according to John Solomon, relating to the Spygate scandal, there were at least 6 different deep state operatives who attempted to infiltrate and set up the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. Get him to do something that was illegal or compromising. And apparently documents recently released have revealed the Obama deep state operatives contacted Trump campaign officials in Great Britain prior to the launch of any of these FBI investigations. This is worse than Watergate. Where's the Washington Post when you really need it? And already they're just cranking up here. Apparently this so-called extremism expert J.M. Berger was on Sirius XM radio out there saying that Trump could command supporters to turn violent, and that they would turn violent. That all Trump has to do is say, Republicans, get out there and kill. I seem to recall it's the Democrats who are calling for violence and in many cases carrying out the violence. Well, it looks like Joe Biden has decided he is going to run for president in 2020 after all. He's out there saying he's the most qualified person for president. Of course, don't they all say that? The good news is that Michael Avenatti, the porn lawyer, has decided he will not be running in the 2020 election. That would have been a real joke, I think. Many years ago in Italy, there was actually a porn star who ran for the Italian parliament. Her name was Cicciolina, and she won. Down in North Carolina, they're still dealing with allegations of vote fraud. Apparently, this concerns that some of the ballots may have been fraudulent. It's a tightly contested race. It has not been called. And it's between Republican Mark Harris and Democrat Dan McCready. Harris is ahead of McCready by 905 votes. And so everybody's pointing fingers and say, election fraud, election fraud, election fraud. When are we going to clean this mess up? And this is another place where Donald Trump campaigned on figuring out a way to have honest, effective, trustworthy elections. And he dropped the ball. This last election proves it. It was just as crooked as any other election in recent years. And it is possible to have honest elections, or at least more honest, more verifiable elections. And again, I refer you to this article at whatreallyhappened.com. In the upper left of the main page, right underneath my ridiculously outdated photo, there's an article link, How to Have Honest Elections. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but if you think about how it's put together, figuring out where you could actually get on in and fake this. The problem is our current government doesn't want an honest election system. That would basically chain them to the American people. They'd have to do what we say instead of their corporate masters. Now, here's a story that is just now breaking. Apparently, during the 2018 campaign, the National Republican Congressional Committee says it was hacked and the emails of top officials stolen. Now, who would do a thing like that? What's really weird is Republican leaders didn't even know it had happened until Politico contacted committee officials about the incident. Now, the MSSP informed the NRCC officials. They, in turn, alerted CrowdStrike, which is a cybersecurity firm that apparently is working both sides of the alley, as it were. Getting on back to Alexandria Occasionally-Cortex, apparently got into a row with Sarah Sanders Huckabee. And a lot of it has to do with some of the really outrageous things that Alexandria has been saying lately. Like, you know, we're going to give away all this free stuff. We'll just pay for it. Oh, how? We just pay for it. And, of course, comparing her election victory to the moon landing. And former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, Sarah's dad, tweeted on back saying the big difference, the moon landing was lunar, your election was loony. And he's right on that one. Alexandria has let this election victory go to her head. She's a freshman. She's at the bottom of the pecking order over there. So let's talk about the economic news, because if you've been following the stock market today, you know it was not good. The Dow ended just shy of 800 down, and earlier in the day, it had been below that. So there's this article over at Government Slaves saying that the psychological bubble that has been propping up the U.S. economy is starting to pop. Because Americans have been encouraged to be optimistic about the stock market, about the economy, because that's what the corporate media is saying. Oh, it's great. We've got record low unemployment. Inflation is under control. Everything's wonderful, and people go along with that. But at some point, people are looking around themselves. They're looking around at the homeless and the hungry and the dilapidated buildings and the decaying, corroded infrastructure and say, no, there's something wrong here. The economy isn't working. We're in a bubble, and it's going to be painful. Even J.P. Morgan is now saying that cash might be better than stocks for holding on to your wealth. It's the first time they've said that in a decade here. So let's talk about the China trade truce. Because over the weekend, the Trump administration, too much fanfare, announced a breakthrough in the trade war with China, according to which Beijing would purchase substantial amounts of U.S. farm products and remove barriers to trade in exchange for a delay of new tariffs and higher tariff rates. Now, Trump left his top advisors scrambling to explain just what was in there, because apparently this agreement does not yet exist on paper and hasn't been confirmed in Beijing. Now, asked about the agreement on Monday, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Trump's top economic advisor Larry Kudlow started dialing back expectations and adding qualifiers. So it may not all be all that was cracked up to be. Larry Kudlow was out there saying that China promises U.S. trade changes immediately, but he's taking that same approach. China goes first, and then we'll do something. By the way, I seriously doubt that part about China buying huge amounts of U.S. farm products, because China does not allow GMO. All right, we have a caller on the line. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
A couple of economic questions for you, Mike. With the GM closing of 5 plants and approximately 14,000 employees, depending on where these plants are located, sounds like they may end up creating some ghost towns. But my question is, we can't rely on Wall Street to see how strong they really are with all the manipulation of the stock values. But do you believe they are cash-strapped, and do you believe they might end up having a fireside sale to clear out that inventory on those vehicles they're going to no longer produce?
Well, I mean, they've been producing vehicles. Nobody's buying them. I mean, and it's not just GM. It's across the board. People don't want to go deeper into debt. They're hanging on to their older cars. They're learning how to fix them themselves as much as they can. The way cars are currently built, they're not built to encourage self-repair. But yeah, there are these huge inventories sitting on out there. We've got one down here at the bottom of the hill. There's an old abandoned 4-screen drive-in movie theater, and used to be a flea market. Now it's just a holding lot for all the surplus inventory that the local car dealers have. They can't move the product. And yeah, at some point, all these automakers, they're in serious trouble, because if they're making autos but nobody's buying them, yeah, there could be a fire set. We could see a crash in automobile prices. We already are seeing a crash in automobile prices. I mean, if you look at the car commercials on TV, boy, this would be a wonderful time to get a new car if you could afford to do it.
Yeah, but my next question follow-up would be, you think the other manufacturers probably will follow the same the same pathway and closing plants and laying off people also. I just wonder if this is going to have a domino effect with the other auto manufacturers, probably. But
well, it's less a domino situation than more of a shakeout. I mean, if you have 2 or 3 automakers collapse and go out of business, obviously that strengthens the position of those that have survived. But GM is definitely in trouble. Tesla's definitely in trouble, and apparently there are rumors around that Ford is going to have to lay off a bunch of people now.
Last question is on Qatar leaving OPEC. They're a small player in OPEC, but what do you make of that, them wanting to leave OPEC? A strategy for their own interest, but in what way? Driving up prices?
That may be part of what they were thinking. It may be that OPEC is starting to fragment. The other members of OPEC are not at all happy about Saudi Arabia and their cozy relationship with the United States. And even Saudi Arabia may be rethinking that because they're starting to buddy up with Russia about possibly forming another oil cartel that would be denominated in a currency other than the U.S. dollar.
That's it. Makes all sense. Appreciate it, Mike. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. And getting on back to the economic news, Chinese economists are saying that now as they continue to gradually open up their financial system to the world, the yuan is becoming more and more important around the globe. And that situation seems to be rising. And at some point, they're saying the yuan will be the global heavyweight. And I think that's true because they manufacture, and that is how you get wealth. You don't just take a bunch of paper notes and shake them back and forth, pray to some wooden owl, and say, ooh, make me rich. You have to have product. In the U.S., pretty much all they're making these days are weapons of war, and they're not really all that good. Anyway, oil prices are falling, and once again, the tar sands and shale oil companies are being hit and driven out of business. Now, as you know, Deutsche Bank got caught in yet another major scandal involving money laundering. It could collapse. And according to this article over at Investment Watch blog, this could trigger the global economic collapse. There's going to be an event that's going to bring it all down because Deutsche Bank is too big to bail, as in bail out. Over in Iran, they're, let's see, we just lost our internet connection on Twitch. And let's see if we're still getting sound out there. Okay, looks like we're still good. So, as I was saying, Iran's steel exports are now up by 23%. They're making products. They're engaging in commerce. They're engaging in peace. We've reached a stage in our country where we're seeing the end result of decades of very short-sighted decision-making by the government. Manufacturing was known to be in trouble all the way back in the 1980s. And the government just said, yeah, we don't need to worry about that. We'll start the service economy, and that'll keep the tax money flowing on in. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And for those of you who have been fans of the radio show for a very long time, you probably recognize these holiday bumpers as music from my wife's album, Christmas Without Borders. Anyway, let's see. Checking in here. Last segment, I made a comment about short-sighted decision-making. And one of the areas where I think that's definitely true is the widening use of robots to replace human beings. Now, overall, I like technology. I think robots are cool. I used to play with them. Actually, if you think about it, I used to work with them. Technically, Viking was a robot. But this displacement, I mean, the pressure on the American worker is intense right now. Their jobs are getting offshored. High-paying jobs are being offshored. You have all these migrants and illegal immigrants coming on in to displace them in our domestic work environment. And now you have the automation. So apparently Walmart has decided that they are going to go with a new fleet of robot janitors. And apparently by the end of January, Walmart will roll out 360 autonomous floor scrubbing robots in many of its stores. And these janitors can clean floors on their own even when customers are around. Now, I'm sure that the tech is amazing, but the consumer economy, of which Walmart is a part, cannot be sustained unless ordinary people can trade their labor for decent wages and salaries with which to go back into those retail places and spend the money. And by the way, I understand that the retail numbers for this holiday shopping season are horrible. In fact, Claire and I had to do some shopping for Christmas. And already things are just being discounted left and right. I mean, shocking amounts. And you could almost see fear in the eyes of those retail clerks. All right, as I mentioned before, the death and mourning and funeral of George Herbert Walker Bush has pushed back a lot of things relative to the government. And as you know, Donald Trump was threatening to withhold his support for a funding bill that did not include at least $5 billion for his border wall. That request has been put on hold, and the Democrats have agreed to a 2-week stopgap funding bill so the government doesn't have to shut down, which personally I would be in favor of. Now, over in Camden, New Jersey, and this is a subject a lot of people are talking about, why are civil governments getting involved in sports arenas? But apparently Camden helped fund, to the tune of $35 million, a baseball stadium. And it was on the city's waterfront. It's about to be demolished and replaced with 3 Rutgers University athletic fields. And apparently the problem is they thought this was going to result in economic development to the area. And more people, they don't go to stadiums anymore because of the security harassment. They prefer to stay at home and watch on their new 4K whiz-bang TV. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news. And by the way, this is hour number 3 of our program here. As you know, iHeartMedia is trying to emerge from bankruptcy and reorganization. And it looks like Liberty Media wants to snag it. And the Denver-based company is angling to take control of the broadcasting behemoth that they have more than 800 stations, including New York's Z100 and 103.5 KTU. And yes, they have one, actually 2, here on Oahu. So basically, the idea is they want to create this soup to nuts toll taker for music lovers by combining iHeart with the other music companies, which include Sirius XM, as well as concert promoter Live Nation and Ticketmaster. Now, here's something that this gets, again, back to what I was saying about the employment situation. Apparently, Republican leaders are getting ready to push through a donor-backed amendment that would allow investors to import more college graduates from India to take jobs now held by American college graduates, who are, of course, struggling to repay those users' student loans. And this Republican amendment puts 300,000 imported Indian temporary workers and 300,000 of their family members on a fast track to green cards, American jobs, citizenship, and the ballot box, but it provides no benefits to the middle-class Americans whose jobs are being taken away. Now, certainly from the donors who are behind this amendment, they're thinking solely in terms of the fact that they're going to get good, hard workers who are not that demanding in terms of pay because they're not struggling with the same kind of debt load America's graduates are dealing with. The other aspect of it has to do with our educational system, because the plain fact of the matter is our college graduates aren't what they used to be. Turning on down to south of the border, apparently migrants who are tired of waiting for the asylum process have started scaling the fence and entering the country. What I'm trying to find out is why the police aren't down there just arresting them and throwing them in trucks. But at least 24 Central American migrants who claim they're disillusioned with the asylum process succeeded in breaching the U.S.-Mexico border by scaling a 10-foot high metal fence. Now, apparently they used blankets to get over the top of the barbed wire. And apparently other migrants managed to squeeze through a section of fence on the coastal city's beach, according to Reuters. All righty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I'm following this thing in France now pretty closely because I think this is really big implications for the United States, Britain, Germany, a lot of these other countries that have gone to globalist type governments. Right now, I would say there's about a 50-50 shot that Monsieur Macron is going to probably be overthrown by his own people. Actually overthrown. I mean, dragged out of his presidential palace. Thing that really got me going yesterday, or this morning when I heard this. This is awesome to me. Is police are starting to turn on Macron and siding with the crowd. They're taking their helmets off and going and joining the crowd. And this is a very more serious sign than if this happened in the United States. Because police are pretty much fractured. They're not really federalized, except for the Federal Bureau of Idiots and stuff like that. So, in France also, a good part of the police, matter of fact, their elite police officers are actually part of the French army. The gendarme,
Yes.
They're part of the French army. When the army starts turning on you, it's over.
Yeah, it's over.
He's gone. They have had de Gaulle was almost a coup against de Gaulle, but de Gaulle, because he was such a nationalist, so popular, and he was he's considered a war hero from World War II and even from World War I. The military was not ready to do that to him, and that was over Algeria, by the way. De Gaulle decided it's time to cut Algeria loose. A lot of the military didn't want to do that, but again, he was so popular, they didn't. But it's not impossible.
Well, after that is when they tried to assassinate him.
Yeah, and they also tried to overthrow him. But this little clown, he doesn't have any clout at all. I don't think the military likes him. I don't think the people don't like him, obviously. The police don't like him. He's dragging France down. They're really just about almost a third world nation right now. I was another show today I was listening to. They said the average Frenchman makes about $1,900 a month right now.
Yes.
Okay, and what they're living on, and yet the gas. This little nerd raised the gas to close to $7 a gallon now, and over this stupid global warming. And the people aren't going for that. And what I think next, if this happens, I think Miss May there in Britain and Miss Merkel in Germany, they better watch it, because I think they're next. I think the people in these countries are sick and tired of these clowns, and I think they're ready to.
It's already happening in Belgium and the Netherlands. this thing could definitely spread.
Yeah, could. So, I mean, while what I'm concerned about too now is that France, this idiot might pull some kind of, like Theresa May already did with the Skripal affair. They might pull some kind of a false flag trying to say Russia did this or Russia did that. And that a guy like Macron and, what's her name, Merkel and Theresa May there, they are crazy enough. And remember, they don't have any kids. Even to save, if they think they can save themselves, or just bring the whole world down with them and start World War III. This is how crazy they are.
I mean, if it does look like there's going to be a global revolt, World War III will be on for real. So they can maintain control because historically nothing has united a populist war than being at war. And saying, we're going to stand with our leader and our flag and our country. It's going to be kind of hard to sell wars at the same time you're preaching globalism. But anyway, Mark,
my hope is though that Putin remains the kind of guy he is, understands what's going on, and uses utmost restraint, and that maybe Trump will finally get it through his thick head that he doesn't want to get involved in this, and he says he's against globalism. And will be on the side of nationalism, and won't go along with these European nutcases there. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think the whole globalist push is starting to fall apart. And again, it's because liberals completely misunderstand human nature. Anyway, Mark, I'm going to let you go here. I got a lot of news to cover, and we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Now, we're talking about immigration, and Representative Pramila Jayapal, who is a Democrat from Washington State, said that she helped 5 migrants enter the United States. She said that 2 were so-called unaccompanied minors, or people who claimed to be under the age of 18. It's not clear how she got the migrants into the country, but she said they were initially denied entry. Now, that's a Title VIII violation. Why isn't somebody arresting her? Meanwhile, the caravans, wherever they are all of a sudden finding themselves leaderless. And apparently the caravan organizers have simply dumped the migrants, meaning they're no longer bringing in food and water and everything else. And this group, Pueblo San Fronteras, now says they have nothing to do with the caravan, and they've skipped town. So a lot of people are saying this might basically be the end. The caravans failed. Meanwhile, down in Tijuana, officials are saying the caravan costs the city up to $40,000 per day just to clean up the mess and take care of all of this. Nancy Pelosi is saying that once she's back Speaker of the House, she's going to be passing illegal alien amnesty. They're going to get the DREAM Act through there. We're going to make all these illegals legal citizens and Democratic voters. That's assuming the Senate would go along with that, and that Trump won't veto it. And here it's getting a little weird. Out in Los Angeles, there's a group called Al Otro Lado, to the other side. It's guiding the migrants. It's helping them come on in. And its litigation director, Erica Pinheiro, is on the scene telling the migrants how to make sure they don't just get into the United States, but get as many benefits from its government as possible. And apparently some of the literature being put out by this group is talking about getting together and overthrowing President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, census records are confirming 63% of non-citizens are on welfare. That's 4.6 million households as of 2014, and certainly it's going to be a lot worse now. All right, let's grab a quick phone call. Ken in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
Aloha.
I'm coming from the factory floor, so you can take this for what it's worth. First off, we'll talk about the layoffs and everything. According to people here on the factory floor, union and management officials, they're all saying that the Ford Motor Company cuts, I can't speak to GM because I don't work there, the Ford Motor Company cuts are going to be mostly done in Europe because they're hemorrhaging money like crazy. Some are going to happen here in the States, but nothing that should affect the hourly people. It should all be everybody in Dearborn and management. And as far as, so I don't see us losing too many factory jobs here in the States.
Okay, well, I'm glad that the Ford cuts are coming mostly in Europe. I heard a number of like 25,000. But the thing is that while these car companies are struggling to basically just stay solvent, the core issue remains the same. People don't have money to buy these cars. And so it is going to continue to deteriorate and decline. We may be in a crash right now. It's a slow motion crash. It's not like a one-day event like back in 1929, but it is definitely a slow decay of the economy.
Money to buy the cars. I have a 10-year-old Ford, and I just recently found out it has a leak, and the part that is leaking is $262. So it's not. It's yes, we don't have the money to buy the car. We don't have the money to fix the car. And I work on the factory floor, and I can't fix my car.
I mean, that's where we are right now. I mean, of course, a big reason for all of that high-priced stuff is to get you to buy these extended auto warranties, which is just another way of getting more money out of you. Anyway, listen, Ken, I got to get back to the news. Thank you for the insight from the factory floor. And we're going to let you go. Okay, getting on back to immigration and globalism. Apparently, Denmark has decided they will send their rejected asylum seekers to live on a remote island located in the freezing Baltic Sea. The island is currently home to animal research laboratories and crematoria. Boy, there's an odd economy here. But basically, Immigration Minister Inger Stoltenberg said, if you are unwanted in Danish society, you should not be a nuisance to ordinary Danes. They are undesirable in Denmark, and they must feel it. So people are really pushing back against the open borders. Now, as you know, the United Nations is pushing this migration pact, and more countries are starting to pull away from it, realizing it is an attack by the United Nations on their national sovereignty and their right to control their own borders here. So a Swedish member of the European Parliament, Christina Winberg, is out there saying there is no human right to migrate here. It just does not exist, and so they're rejecting that whole idea. And a lot of countries, it sounded good when they did it, symbolically, but now that countries are actually having to look at this idea of having the UN mandate absolutely permanently open borders and looking around at what's happening to their cities and their culture and their economy, they're getting cold feet. And I'm sure that George Soros has spent a huge amount of money pushing this agenda. A lot of other people have been pushing it as well. The UN is certainly in favor of it. But they really didn't think it all the way through as whether they were going to be able to pull it off. Because it doesn't look to me like they can. And they may actually do exactly the opposite and shatter countries apart. Getting on down to Great Britain, and again, for those of you who missed it earlier in the show, for the first time in history, Theresa May's Tory party was found in contempt of Parliament for withholding vital information about her version of the Brexit deal. And they're now saying they will publish all of the relevant information. But as of right now, it looks like the vote on Theresa May's deal is going down to defeat. And with it will probably take her prime ministership, possibly even her entire government. On the other side, over at the European Court of Justice, their Advocate General Manuel Campos Sanchez Bordona has declared that Great Britain can simply unilaterally withdraw its Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty notification. All it takes is a parliamentary vote, and yeah, we'll just hand it back to you and pretend like none of this ever happened. And it's another unholy alliance of domestic and foreign interests who are working to reverse the 2016 result. And before you go ahead and do that, you'd better take a look at what's going on in Paris, France right now, or all over France. Because I think the Europeans have just been pushed right to the very edge. It's Les Miserables all over again. Now, earlier in the context of pressure on the American worker and more foreign-born workers coming in to take jobs of college students, comes this little story. This is at Columbia University. It was found in a PowerPoint presentation trusting students to assess themselves, basically promoting the idea of letting students write their own grades. It will promote inclusive grading, or, as one of my readers wrote on in, how to have a PhD the easy way. I can just see it 4 years from now. Look, Columbia University, the 4.0 school. Well, if the students are going to grade themselves, of course they're going to give themselves good grades. And again, removes an incentive to study harder. Okay, last week we had this story that came out of Oakland University about how they were going to arm teachers with hockey pucks to defend against mass shootings. It turns out that story was a hoax. It's a PR stunt. The issue being that the faculty want the university to buy more secure locks for the doors. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to talk a little bit about the world of computers. And there has to be a remedy for this next one here. Apparently, Wells Fargo has admitted that a computer glitch led to more than 500 customers losing their home. Now, the bank announced that an underwriting error had caused it to incorrectly reject some 870 home loan modifications, resulting in the bank foreclosing 545 homes. And everybody's saying, how could this happen? And is Wells Fargo going to give these people back their homes? 545 homes just gone from, oh, it's a computer glitch. You know, we didn't mean to do wrong. It's just a computer glitch. I would imagine that probably most of those homes have already been resold. So I hope those homeowners get together and have a class action lawsuit. Or maybe it's just time for some good old-fashioned tar and feathers. Now, the Anti-Defamation League has given the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, an award for censoring online speech. The award is called the Courage Against Hate, for blocking people like, well, Alex Jones, whom Tim Cook describes as a violent conspiracy theorist. Now, I've known Alex Jones for a lot of years. We don't get along very well. In fact, right now we're not on speaking terms, but I have never known him to be violent or to encourage violence. Now, if I'm wrong, somebody's free to correct me on that one, but certainly in the many times that I was on his program, he did not encourage violence. Anyway, now then, this is the Christmas shopping season. It's also the Christmas shoplifting season. And these scammers who are having their own shopping list, Christmas list to deal with, are out in force. And I had a listener email me saying that she'd gotten a phone call from somebody posing as a Social Security agent wanting her Social Security number. Now, she hung up on him, then Googled the phone number that had shown up in the caller ID, and it turned out to be the official Social Security phone number. So she called the Social Security Administration, and they said, yeah, it's a fraud. The scammers are using spoofed ID phones where you can pretend to be anybody that you want to be, and it's a big headache. I can understand if you want to be anonymous, but people posing as others, I mean, one of the ways the telemarketers are trying to get around people who don't want to talk to them is when they call you up, they'll spoof a phone number that looks like it's very near where you live. So you'll think it's somebody maybe you know or just met. So be on guard, because the scammers are out there and the government is too busy fighting amongst itself and bombing the rest of the world to really care about it. Over at Apple, again, the outlook is not good, and Apple is already having to resort to promotionals and price cuts to try and get people to buy the iPhone 10. Part of the problem, of course, is the market is saturated. They've sold a lot of those phones, and that's a really, really good thing. And again, people don't have the money to buy the latest and greatest just so they can have the latest and greatest. They're going to use those phones until they absolutely stop working. Then they'll go on and see about the best deal they can get. And even then, they won't buy the latest one. They'll just buy one that's maybe one or two beyond what they have. But apparently, Apple has started moving much of its marketing staff to work on methods of boosting iPhone sales. A person familiar with the matter described it as a fire drill and basically confirms that Apple's devices are selling below expectations. And another part of the issue, of course, is that Apple over the years is starting to evolve toward being a single product company. Yes, they still make laptop computers and a few other things like that, but the focus has been on the iPhones. That's their big marketing push. That's their big money maker, except it's not making money anymore, and their stock performance is off. Of course, today everybody's stock performance was off. It's a good thing those buildings on Wall Street are air conditioned and you can't open the windows, or it would have been raining brokers today. Meanwhile, over at Microsoft, they are announcing plans to kill off its Edge browser and create a new browser based on the same technology as Google's Chrome. So apparently, Microsoft is throwing in the towel. Once again, they tried to have a slightly different HTML, and people just didn't want to bother with it. I think we're all getting sick of Microsoft's arrogance. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we all know what speed cameras are. Just drive down, you're going too fast, or you make a wrong turn, you get mailed a ticket. And most of us generally drive keeping an eye out for them. But apparently, somebody has now developed a police speed camera that watches drivers from almost a mile away. It's got to be a heck of a lens on that thing. But that's how they're going to get around people who are watching for the speed cameras. And this is Big Brother stuff. And, you know, police shouldn't be filming innocent people inside their cars without their knowledge unless they're suspected of a crime or driving dangerously. But of course, the speed cameras take your picture if you set off the speed camera to confirm it's really you behind the wheel. Most of the studies involving these speed cameras are showing they do not, in fact, increase traffic safety. It's just another way of sucking money out of the general population. Some years back, there was actually an interesting experiment conducted in Europe where they decided to remove the clutter of traffic signs and gratuitous lights along the roads, and traffic safety went up because people weren't just constantly trying to read all the traffic signs while they were driving along, and they paid more attention to the road in front of them. But I'm sure that the lobby for the company that makes traffic signs would say, oh, no. More traffic signs, the better here. Okay, this one I'm kind of on the fence with. And there's a story over at the Organic Prepper. In New York State, there's a gun bill on the table that would require would-be firearm purchasers to turn over 3 years of their social media history and 1 year of their internet search history if they want to buy a gun. And the police would go through there looking for anything that might indicate that you are not a fit person for a weapon. And on the one hand, there's that privacy violation. And on the other hand, I do think there needs to be some kind of a mechanism to not allow potentially dangerous people to acquire a firearm. And because they're not willing to start talking about the link between prescription antidepressants and violent behavior, like I said, I'm rather torn about this. It's definitely that there's a good side and a bad side to all of this. All right, apparently there's been yet another recall of ground beef for salmonella. 5.1 million pounds of ground beef have been pulled from shelves. It comes 2 months after the USDA issued a recall of 6.5 million pounds of beef from the same manufacturer, JBS Tolson Incorporated, which is the third largest producer in the U.S. and the top meat packager in the world. That is a lot of cows that got killed for nothing here. Russia is, well, they have said no to GMO. They are now the world's largest exporter of non-GMO food. And while the Western world cozies up to Monsanto and other corporations producing GMO crops, Russia is ramping up the production of its own organic GMO-free rented lips produce, and is set to become the world's biggest exporter. And they will find customers. They will definitely find customers out there. I wonder if buying non-GMO food will be cited as an excuse to see you as a Russian stooge. You're refusing to eat GMO. You must be working for Vladimir Putin. Here's another example of how America's corporations are being rather reckless with their product here. There's a chemical called diethyl phthalate. It's used in perfumes and cosmetics. It's only banned by the European Union in significant concentrations this year. It's been found out this could trigger the early onset of puberty in girls. And apparently methylparaben does exactly the same thing. This is another chemical found in high street body lotions and hand creams. Anyway. Apparently there is new research showing that statins are not the miracle medicines they've been out to be. In fact, recent research has shown statins actually pose a threat to heart health and are linked to an increase, not a decrease, of arterial calcification. And of course, the pharmaceutical industries out there say, oh no, we've got to pass more of these prescriptions, even for people who don't have any heart problems. It's a preventative. It's a preventative, just pushing this. But apparently there is this research that was done up in Switzerland saying that for most people, the dangers from the statins outweigh the possible benefits. But it makes money. And that's all that's really important. It makes money. Okay. As you know, there's this hashtag #MeToo movement, and it's been very disruptive to our society because it basically allows women to go on out and say, oh, yes, I got raped. They abused me. Accusation equals guilt. Sexual assault is a serious crime that even innocence should not be used as a defense here. So psychologist Bettina Amt has claimed that the global Me Too feminist movement has granted women a license to destroy men, as we saw during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And the psychologist and author controversially blamed the feminist movement for throwing false accusations of rape and violence at men, and went as far as to label feminism as a destructive force in our society. And yes, it's proven to be that way, both currently, and we went through it back in the 1990s, the militant feminist movement. Now, feminism started out with high ideals: equal pay for equal work, equal access to education, equal access to credit. Who could not agree with that? And then the movement got hijacked, and it went militant, and it started bashing males and screaming, all males are rapists. And even back then in the 1990s, encouraging false accusations of rape, and a lot of innocent men got sent to jail. Anyway, over in Ireland, at the Irish College of General Practitioners, there was a meeting about the government's plans to legalize abortion starting on the 1st of January. And the doctors were told they would have to comply with this law. And a lot of the doctors just walked on out. 300 doctors attended this meeting. And a lot of them just walked on out saying that, you know, they have a conscience. They don't agree with it. Now, to me, the obvious, simple solution is going to be refer the women who want an abortion to the doctors who are willing to do that and leave these other guys alone. But based on precedent we've seen in our own country, they're going to be told, you will bake that cake with the gay couple on there. I'm sorry, you will do the abortion here. It's hard to have a conscience in this day and age. It really, really is. Okay, a little bit of good news from NASA. The OSIRIS-REx spacecraft has finally arrived at asteroid Bennu more than 2 years after blasting off from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. I'm wondering why they stopped calling it Cape Kennedy. Anyway, basically, it's an ambitious mission to study a near-Earth object. And, of course, it's not the first time we've seen a spacecraft get close to an asteroid, but this is a much larger, more ambitious mission, including a sample return. And OSIRIS-REx will spend the next year in orbit around its target before dropping down briefly so it can scoop up a sample of dirt and rock from the surface and bring it back to Earth. And that will be interesting to see what they find there. Oh, now you're going to love this story. You probably saw this on the news today. Yesterday, supposedly the civil trial against Jeff Epstein, the billionaire pedophile, was supposed to start. And almost immediately they've announced that Jeff Epstein had agreed to a settlement. It's described as a victory for survivors. There's a financial settlement. The details are being kept confidential. Well, basically, I think there were a lot of people who didn't want that case in court because some embarrassing things were going to be coming on out. Certainly it would be embarrassing for Epstein himself. And now, of course, they get to seal it all back up, and that will be the end of it. But don't forget, the royal family were caught up in this as well. Prince Andrew was photographed with one of Epstein's girls, and it was listed as an exhibit in this court case. So the British government, on top of everything else they're dealing with, may have come on in and say, we'll help pay for this, let's just settle it down. So, anyway. Now, a while back, we were talking about this scientist in China who had created genetically modified babies, which ignited a firestorm of controversy. Well, apparently, he is now missing. The Chinese government came on in and said, shut it all down. You're not going to do this. Now he has not been seen for some time. So, what's going on? Has he been arrested? There's a rumor he's arrested. Or he may be heading to someplace else where he can do this research. But the danger with this gene editing babies is that it could be used for bad purposes. What if you create human beings that are dependent on something supplied by the pharmaceutical industry merely to stay alive? Or the fact that he was out there, his stated goal was to create humans who were more resistant to HIV. But HIV is a huge moneymaker for the big pharmaceutical corporations. And we know over the last several years, there have been a lot of strange deaths of medical researchers who are working on things like cures for cancer, or the fact that cancer may be artificially induced. So if he was out there able to cure all these diseases before the child is born, that's a major, major financial loss. Major loss. Okay. A little while back, at Goucher College near Baltimore, about a month ago, students found backwards swastikas and racist graffiti scrawled in the bathroom stalls, and a list of names or dorm numbers for black students was also found. And of course, it ignited this huge incident about, racism, Nazis. And Goucher President Jose Bowen and other campus officials wrote a letter to students about the incident. And the administrators wrote, the tags were made with permanent marker and included hateful, threatening, and racist graffiti, which was specifically anti-black and anti-Latin, Latinx, or Latino. And these writings were similar to a November 14th incident, which also included a backwards swastika, which, by the way, is generally a dead giveaway. Something's wrong here. So police investigated the writing, and the day after the letter was published, November 30th, the police had their suspect. And it turned out to be Finn Arthur, one of the African-American students named in the list. He has been charged with 2 counts of malicious destruction of property and released on his own recognizance. In other words, it's another hate crime hoax. It's amazing. From the world of politically correct thought and reminding us that our vocabularies are going to be dwindling. If you're my age, you've probably heard phrases like bringing home the bacon, or put all your eggs in one basket. Well, these are now offensive speech. And no, we're not talking about Muslims here. Apparently, vegetarians, vegans and vegetarians, they're made uncomfortable by the word bacon. Poor, poor souls. Those darlings. It is just absolutely insane out there. At the rate this is going, virtually every word in the English language is going to be declared offensive to somebody. What are we supposed to do after that? Use sign language? Smoke signals? An Aldous lamp? Okay. Somebody just posted this story over at whatreallyhappened.com. How the CIA used feminism to destabilize society. Well, if that was the stated intent, they sure got that one right. It did destabilize society. Aaron Russo also, shortly before his passing, came on out and said, feminism was created to destabilize society, to tax women, and set up the New World Order. And that was a big result of what happened back in 1990. Now, when I was a kid, again, you had stay-at-home mothers and working fathers. And that worked. But in the 1990s, women were being told not that they had the choice to go out and work in the world, but that they had to, that there was something wrong with them if they didn't. And of course, this increased taxation opportunity for the government. And most families found out they were actually financially worse off because between the higher taxes they were paying and the child care costs, they actually had less left over. And I'm not surprised that so many families are going back to one working parent, one caretaker. It really does work. The problem when both parents are working, who's raising the children? TV, computer games, Common Core. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. And Christmas is under attack. I mean, it's bad enough that it's been transformed into just this glorified marketing opportunity, but now the traditions, the memories are being taken apart. They're complaining about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Apparently, in their crosshairs right now is this classic Christmas song, Baby, It's Cold Outside. It's not specifically about Christmas, but it's traditional winter fare. And it's this couple singing together in front of a fireplace, and he's trying to get her to basically stay longer. And that's now considered offensive because it promotes date rape. One of the other commentators said, what is this unmarried couple doing together alone in the first place? I mean, that's how ridiculous it is. They're taking on the movie A Christmas Story about how it's all about, it's all about children's pain and it's all about consumerism. Okay, fine. Be Ebenezer Scrooge and just go home and let the rest of us play. Because I grew up in a time and place with very strong historical traditions. And I want to be left alone. I want you to stop coming on in and telling me that everything that I like is a problem for you, because I just don't care anymore. I am sick and tired of all the whining and the presumed arrogance that somehow I am subordinate to your wishes. Please don't do that. You're offending me. Yes, massa. Yes, massa. Yes, massa. It really is out of control here. Okay, apparently somebody sent in another article here about speed camera protests. Apparently there are big problems in Australia, Belgium, France, New Zealand, and South Africa where people are just declaring all-out war and finding ways to damage and disable the cameras here. Belgium, which is, by the way, has their own yellow vest protests right now, may actually collapse. Their government may collapse over that United Nations Migration Pact. And of course, this document has been boycotted by Italy, France, Poland, Israel, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Australia, Slovakia, Hungary, and Austria. They've all rejected it in favor of stronger border controls. It's failing. The open borders agenda, the globalism agenda, it's all coming apart. It may get very ugly before it's all over. So, alrighty. Apparently, Sandy Hook's Leonard Posner is now suing Professor James Fetzer and his publisher over a book questioning the official story of Sandy Hook. So they're going to keep using the lawfare to try and silence anybody who refuses to believe as they're being told to believe. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got some stuff I got to get done this afternoon. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots and lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Use private conversation. Bring back the art of the conversation. Don't bother with corporate social media. It's even more heavily filtered than before. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. They really need your help. we could use your help over at whatreallyhappened.com as well. So have a good evening. We'll be back tomorrow, and Aloha America.